Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Today we're going to go through and explain the Constitution. This is the first in my video series of the Constitution Explained. Today we're going to go through the preamble and all about Article 1, which is the longest article in the Constitution. So we're going to focus in on that article today. First up, let's talk about the 6 goals of the preamble. We've talked about these, but here they are. The preamble set out, first and foremost, to set up a stronger government than under the Articles of Confederation, because the framers of the Constitution generally agreed that the Constitution needed to replace the weaker Articles of Confederation. They wanted to improve the court system. They wanted to institute a court system because a court system was previously non-existent in the country. They wanted to establish peace among all of the states because that was also something that was a little bit hard to achieve without any military powers or taxing powers, as Shays's rebellion demonstrated, which we have already talked about. Another thing that was making people anxious around 1787, the time of the Constitution, is that the country may or may not, without military powers, have been able to protect its citizens from enemies. What might happen if Great Britain decided they wanted their colonies back, which, spoiler alert, happened during the War of 1812. They started gradually trying to grab up colonies. They wanted some protection in place. They wanted to make sure that everyone in the country had good living conditions, good livable living conditions, and they wanted to ensure that the freedom that they put in place today was still in place for generations to come. Now let's dive into Article 1, which is all about the legislature, or the branch of government that makes our laws. The branch of government that makes our laws is called the Congress. It was the same name under the Articles of Confederation, but we decided to put in a different structure under the Constitution. So the powers that are granted to the legislature are the powers to make laws. They don't get to carry them out. They don't get to interpret them. They are the ones that get to write them and send them off to the other branches of government to do with them as they will. All right. The laws all originate in the Congress. The difference between the Congress of the Articles, the Continental Congress under the Articles, and the Congress as we know it today is that our Congress is bicameral. All right. This was actually modeled after the bicameral legislature of Great Britain. In Great Britain, they have the Parliament. Remember, it's illegal to say Parliament in anything except for a British accent in my classroom. But the Parliament has an upper house and a lower house, just like we have an upper house and a lower house as well. Now, interestingly enough, in today's day and age, the Senate and the House of Representatives have about the same amount of power to make laws. They do pretty much the same work. They just represent different groups of people. Back in the day, in the early days of the country, the Senate was actually not voted on by the people. So they were looked at as sort of more the upper echelons of society. So that's why they called the Senate the upper house. And the House of Representatives mirrored the parliamentary House of Commons. And so they were called the lower house. You know, they were the ones that the quote unquote commoners got to vote for. In America, we can't have titles of nobility, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this video, actually. But we still modeled our government, our Congress, after the way that Great Britain modeled their Parliament, with an upper house and a lower house. So first, let's talk about the House of Representatives, or the House for short. Representatives, which are the people that serve in the House of Representatives, it's easy enough to remember, are chosen every 2 years by the state's voters. The states have always, since day one of ratification, have gotten to vote on representatives in the House of Representatives. This is also the part of the Constitution that would go on in the first 150, 200 years of our country's history. It would go on to lead to lots of voting discrimination. This is where it says that each state gets the power to decide who is qualified to vote. All right, the only position that could be voted for in early America was representatives. We've since added the right to vote for president. We've since added the right to vote for senators in the 17th Amendment. But representatives have always been voted on. And so voting laws, because of this clause in the Constitution, were decided by the states. And this is the clause that states originally used to restrict voting to white landowning men. This was progressive for 1787. People thought that women were unfit to vote. They also didn't consider the enslaved populations or the Native American populations, did not consider them to even be people. And so that's why they were not allowed to vote. Over the course of our country's history, those voting restrictions, which historically had been allowed, have been lifted through various social movements and civil rights movements. So women ended up getting the right to vote. Freed slaves, African Americans, anyone under the age of 21 have now received the right to vote because of various pushes in our country's history. The House of Representatives has certain qualifications. To be in the House of Representatives, this is important, you're going to want to write this down. You must be 25 years old, you must have been a U.S. citizen for 7 years, and you must live in the state that you represent. Population districts don't count here because they're redrawn every 10 years, and representatives are not going to vote themselves out of a job. So they don't have to live in the district they represent, they just have to live in the state that they represent. A little bit about the basis of representation in the House. The number of representatives any state has is based on the number of people in that state. So, this has to be reapportioned after every census. How do we know how many people are in the state? Well, we look at the Census Bureau data. In every 10 years on so 2020, there was one, 2030, 2040, 2050. They have a census every 10 years where every single person in the United States is counted. So every person of voting age is represented equally in the United States. And so this has to be recounted every 10 years. In the Constitution, it provides for there being at least one representative for every 30,000 people. Now, here's the deal. If we went down that road, we would have like 1,000 members of the House of Representatives. The population of America grew to extreme lengths, much more than the framers of the Constitution would have ever intended might have happened. So, now it is no longer one representative for every 30,000. It's more like one representative for every 700,000. Each state has to have at least one. So even if there's less than 30,000 people that live in a state, they still have to have at least one representative. Now, as of 1929, it went into effect in 1930, there are only 435 members of the House. I know I say only, and that's a huge number, but they capped it at 435 to keep Congress from getting too large. If Congress gets too large, nothing will ever get done because then you will have just a massive amount of people trying to vote on one thing. And as I proved in class, it's very hard to get a lot of people to generally agree on something as essential as a law that rules the entire country. We couldn't even decide on the best pizza topping or the best ice cream flavor in our class. So how are you going to get, and there's definitely, they cap classes at 36, so I'm never trying to get more than 51% of 36 people to agree on that. How are we going to get half of thousands and thousands of people to agree on something as important as a law that affects everybody? That's why they capped it at 435. It's one representative for a lot of people, but that's why that is how it is. Here's kind of how the breakdown of representatives works. So here in Illinois, we have 17 representatives. A state like California has 52, a state like Texas has 38, a state like New York has 26. Big states have a lot of representatives. I'm talking big states in terms of population, not in terms of area, because our biggest state in terms of area only has one representative because it doesn't have the requisite amount of people to get another representative. Places like North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, only one representative. Delaware only has one representative. Hawaii's only got two. Montana gained one in the last census, interestingly enough. But essentially, where the population moves to will gain representatives. Where the population moves out of will lose representatives. So we previously had 18 representatives, and because a lot of people moved out of the state of Illinois, we lost. Same thing happened to California. They used to have more representatives, but a lot of people have moved out of the state of California. Places that are green, like Texas, had a lot of people moving into Texas. They gained 2 seats in the last census. So the amount of representatives each state has is completely dependent on its population. If states lose population, they lose representatives. If they gain population, they gain representatives. Governors will decide how to fill vacancies in the House if their representative dies or their representative leaves office. So that is up to the governors. Sometimes they just wrote into the Constitution that there will be a special election. Sometimes the governors get to appoint someone. It's completely up to the governors of each state. The leader of the House is called the Speaker of the House, and the Speaker is chosen by the members of the House. Now, usually it's the majority party that decides, but this isn't written into the Constitution. But think through it logically. If it's the legislature that gets to decide the Speaker, if it's the House that gets to decide the Speaker, the person who gets the most votes is going to be the one who is the Speaker. Who's got the most votes? The majority party. So clearly it's going to be a member of that majority party. But as the Constitution doesn't mention parties at all, that's not actually written into the Constitution. That's just the way that the world tends to work in our country. The House of Representatives has the power to impeach. Now, this is very important. Impeach means accused. It doesn't mean kicked out of office. If you are impeached, you are accused of wrongdoing by the House of Representatives. All right? They do not decide whether or not to remove official from office. The House of Representatives just does the accusing, which is called impeaching. All right, someone else has the power to remove an official from office. There have been in our country 3 presidents who have been impeached as of February 2023 when I am recording this. There have been 3 presidents who have been impeached. None have been removed, but there have been 3 who have been impeached. Now let's talk about the upper house, or the other house of the Congress. It's the Senate. Senators have a much longer term. Each senator serves for 6 years, and a third of the Senate is up for election every 2 years. So as soon as one senator is elected in, they serve a term of 6 years. All right, but a third of the Senate will be voted in when that same senator is voted in. 2 years down the road, another third of the Senate will be up for re-election. Another 2 years down the road, another third. What this does is it allows for more gradual change. The House of Representatives is supposed to represent the whims and the wills of the people and change as people's will changes. The Senate is supposed to be more of a steady, gradually changing body. All right, they're the people that you want to keep in for longer to add a little bit more stability. Some qualifications to be in the Senate: you have to be 30 years old, so a little bit older to serve on the Senate. You have to be a U.S. citizen for 9 years, and you have to live in the state you represent, which makes sense because as a senator, you represent the whole state. Leadership in the Senate. So the vice president is technically the leader of the Senate. The vice president presides or watches over the Senate. Usually, practically, the vice president is only there for ceremonial roles or when Congress session opens, during the State of the Union address, is the only time that the vice president really has much of a role in the Senate. But the vice president also has a vote if there's a tie in the Senate. So the vice president does have a very real role, just not very often. Usually the person who presides in the vice president's absence is called the president pro tempore. Or if the vice president becomes president, then the president pro tempore sort of moves up and becomes the permanent presider over the Senate. President pro tempore is usually just the person who served in the Senate for the longest. Now, while it's the House of Representatives that impeaches, meaning the House of Representatives does the accusing, the Senate has the power to remove. They're the ones that put those impeached officials on trial. They sit as a sort of jury to this public official's wrongdoings. And the senators are the ones who vote either to remove or not to remove that official from office. So the way that I always tell my students to remember this is the House impeaches, the Senate removes. I'm going to repeat that for posterity's sake. The House impeaches, the Senate removes. And they need a supermajority in order to remove any public official from office. So again, it's not a regular majority. It puts on a cape and becomes a super majority. That's a 2/3 majority. Impeachment powers that the Congress has are a sort of check on the executive and the judicial branches. The judiciary has no role in impeaching. Just the legislature has impeachment powers. All right, so impeachments, they aren't criminal cases. They are political cases. All right, you don't have to commit an actual crime to be impeached, as we saw with Bill Clinton. Having illicit relations with an intern is not an actual crime. However, it is wrong, and he was impeached for that. He was not removed, but he was impeached. Some miscellaneous items in Article 1. I'll kind of go rapid fire through these. You don't have to write these down. You don't have to know them. They're just kind of important pieces of Article 1 that needed to be put somewhere, so they put them in the longest article. Each state can decide when, where, and how elections for senators occurs. Congress has to at least meet once a year. The House and the Senate decide whether or not members are entitled to their office. So if they, suspect someone's lying about their age and they actually aren't qualified, they can kick them out. Each house makes their own rules for conducting business. So there's rules in the Senate. There's a lot more rules in the House. They're the ones that get to set those rules. Both houses have to keep an official journal of what is done. So you want to know what laws are passed in a time period? There's an official Senate journal and an official House journal as well. If in session, Senate and House, Congress can't adjourn for more than 3 days. All right, usually they don't adjourn. They just sort of suspend the session until the next day because they're not allowed to adjourn for more than 3 days. But if the session's just suspended, then they can. They have to meet in the same city, which is kind of superfluous now that we have a official, we have an official capital city. When the Constitution was written, we didn't. The first Congress met in New York. But they put that in there just to make sure that they weren't, oh, I thought that we were meeting in New York today. No, we're actually meeting in Philadelphia today, and trying to, escape other members of Congress. Congress has to be paid out of the Treasury of the U.S. Congressmen and congresswomen have immunity, which means they can't be arrested in the course of their duties. So if they're speeding to try and get to a congressional session or a committee meeting, they cannot be arrested for speeding. Except for treason or serious crimes, they cannot be arrested. It's assumed that they have a good reason for having to speed to get to that committee meeting. They also can't hold another office while serving in Congress. If they are elected to the House of Representatives or the Senate, that is their only job. Now let's talk about how a bill becomes a law. So the bill can begin in either chamber. It can begin in the House and the Senate. A senator or a representative has to introduce that bill. They might get it from an outside source, but it has to be a senator or a representative that introduces it. Then it goes to the stage where all bills go to die. Not all of them, but most of them. All right, it goes to the committee stage. Committees work on the bill, they rewrite it, they collect evidence, they hold hearings, they amend it, they suggest different amendments, and then the committee will either vote to advance that bill or they can kill it. They can say, nope, this bill will never pass. We're just going to put it aside and forget about it. That's called pigeonholing. Then, if it passes committee, if the committee recommends it, it goes to what's called the committee of the whole, which means it goes to the entire chamber of Congress where that bill originated. The whole chamber hears what's in the bill, and then they vote on it. If it's passed, it goes to the committee stage of the other chamber. Same process. That committee will collect evidence, hold hearings, might amend the bill, and then they'll either advance it or they'll say, we're going to pigeonhole this one. It's never going to go anywhere. So then it'll go to the committee of the whole of the other chamber, where the whole chamber will hear it and vote on it. And then if they pass it, then it has to go to what's called a conference committee, and the House has to vote to pass the amendments. All right, so there's lots and lots of committee stages, but essentially I'll show you kind of a visual representation of how this works. If both houses accept the same version of the bill, then the bill will go to the president's desk. And the president has three choices. He can sign it. If he likes the bill, he can sign it, and then that bill then becomes law. He can veto it. He can say, I don't like this bill. Vetoed. I think there's a stamp or something that he puts on it. And then it goes back to Congress, and Congress has a few options from there that we'll talk about in a minute. Congress can override the veto with a super majority, and then it's a law. And that's another check that Congress has on the executive. The third option is the president can ignore it. If the president ignores a bill when Congress is in session, then that bill just sort of quietly becomes a law after 10 days. But if the bill is given to the president within 10 days of the end of a session, like say he gets the bill, but Congress's session ends in 3 days, then it just dies without the president having to make any kind of statement on that bill whatsoever. And this is called a pocket veto. So the president can either sign it, veto it, or ignore it. So here, I would recommend that you take a screenshot of this, because this is the entire process of how a bill becomes a law. All right, so it's introduced in either house of Congress, and it's referred to committee. The committee might approve it or they might kill it. And if they approve it, then it goes to Congress. All right. Both houses have to vote on it. Let's say it started in the House. The House of Representatives would vote on it. And then it would go to the other house, which is the Senate, who then would also vote on it. All right. If either house does not approve the bill, they can either send it back to committee, say, hey, we like the idea of this bill, but it's got to be changed a little bit. They can send it back to committee, and then it can, get stuck in that cycle. Or they can just reject it outright. All right. If, however, they both pass it, then it goes to the president's desk. If both houses approve the bill, it goes to the president, who decides to either sign it, and the bill becomes law, or not to sign it, and then the bill is vetoed. A vetoed bill will go back to Congress, and once both houses of Congress receive that vetoed bill, they have three options. They can change the bill more to the president's liking and then vote on it, and the president can then have that same decision in front. They can agree that the bill will never be passed and just reject it. Or they can vote, if they have 2/3 of the people that want this to be a law, they can override a presidential veto. All right, well, some kind of miscellaneous facts in Article 1. Congress has the power to make laws. Congress can borrow money on the credit of the United States. They have the power to regulate commerce. This is called the Commerce Clause, and it's part of the Constitution that Congress has used to expand their own power quite a lot. They have the power to set naturalization laws. So naturalization is the process by which a citizen of another country becomes a citizen of the United States. And so it's Congress that has the ability to set what the requirements for that process are. They have the power to coin money and determine its worth. No state can coin its own money. They have the power to punish counterfeiters. So if you try to make your own money that wasn't created by the proper channels, then you will be punished by Congress. Congress has the power to institute a postal service. They also issue copyrights and patents. They establish the lower courts. So they have a lot of power over the court system. So they establish any federal courts they want to, except for the Supreme Court, but they also get to decide how many justices sit on the Supreme Court. They have the sole power to declare war. Now, there hasn't been an officially declared war since, you guessed it, World War II, but that is one of their official powers. They also get to organize state militias, so the state militias are all organized at Congress's direction. They have a lot of other powers, but those are kind of the most important. Kind of trying to rapid fire go through this so it's not too long. Article 1 also lays out what Congress is not allowed to do. So Congress, because of the Commerce and Slave Trade Compromise, was not allowed to act on the slave trade before 1808. The framers intended to get rid of slavery, but they also knew that the document would not pass without Southern support because the South had most of the United States population at the time. They can't deny anyone what's called habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is Latin for to bring the body. People must be able to hear the charges against them before they are imprisoned or tried. They can't pass a bill of attainder or an ex post facto law. So what this just means is Congress can't pass a law with the intention to punish someone who's already committed the act that they have now made illegal. So a good example of this that is pretty relatable is, if people start to think that drivers are going too fast down Black Road, and they put up a traffic camera and they catch you speeding, going 55 miles an hour, or no, if they catch you going 40 miles an hour or 45, depending on what part of Black Road you're on, if they catch you going 40 miles an hour down Black Road, but then they pass a law that states that the speed limit on Black Road is now 35, they can't go back and say, well, before this law was passed, we caught so-and-so driving 40 miles an hour down Black Road. That action can't be punished because it wasn't illegal at the time. It was only illegal after the fact. So that's an ex post facto law. They can't make an act illegal and then punish someone who's already committed that act because it wasn't illegal at the time they committed it. They can't place a tax on exports. Again, this was to appease the South. The South had a huge agricultural economy that they exported to other countries, and they knew that taxes on exports would bankrupt them. All right, so in order to appease the South, they said, nope, taxes on exports are illegal. Can't make laws that favor trade for certain states. So another good example of this is you can't make a law that says if you have shipping coming into your state via an actual ship, a water ship, then you get a 20% tax break. Well, that's not fair to landlocked states that don't get freight shipped in via water. That would blatantly favor some states over other states, and that's not allowed under the Constitution. Congress has to pass spending laws in order to spend any money, and so this is what ends up shutting the Congress down more often than not. They also can't grant any titles of nobility, so sorry if it's your dream to be a prince or a princess, or a lord or a lady or a baron or an earl, you gotta move somewhere else. You can't do it in the United States. Also, Article 1 has several things that the states cannot do. They can't make treaties with other states. All right, it's generally, we are the United States. You can't favor one state over another state. They can't give citizens permission to fight another country. All right, the United States Army can go to war with another country. Susie Q from Montana can't get permission from the governor to go overseas and fight for America. That's not a thing that the states can grant. States can't coin their own money. Again, this was a huge issue under the Articles. They can't pass laws that allow anything other than gold or silver to be used as money. This just goes back to they can't create their own currencies. States can also not give titles of nobility. So, sorry. They also can't pass those ex post facto laws. They can't punish things that have already been done. And then the final thing in Article 1 is the necessary and proper clause. The actual text of the necessary and proper clause states, and to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. What does this mean? It means that Congress has the power to make all laws that they deem necessary and proper to carry out the powers granted to them by this document. This is also called the elastic clause. Why? Because what does elastic do? It stretches. This necessary and proper clause stretches Congress's powers, much like elastic. So if the Congress thinks that something is necessary and proper, they can pass a law that'll do that necessary and proper thing. All right. The terms necessary and proper have changed over the course of history. And so that's why our laws have changed over the course of history. It's very, very vague. It's meant to be so that the Congress can sort of adapt and change their job to adapt and change with the times. Why would an anti-federalist be opposed to the Constitution based on this very clause? It's because it gives a lot of power to the U.S. government. And that is Article 1. So this is the longest section of the Constitution. If you've gotten through it this far, if you've taken good notes, give yourselves a pat on the back. I will see you back here for the next one.